Hello and welcome to the pod. I'm your host, Oscar. You can follow the show on Twitter at MiamiPod. TheMiamiPod.com is where you can find iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, and RSS feeds, as well as our Patreon and PayPal links if you care to support us. I'm joined by Ian Wharton as ever. You can follow at NFL Film Study and find his work at draftcentric.weebly.com and Bleacher Report. Today we're going to talk about the fifth-year option on Ja'Wuan James, then third-round picks, quickly glance over undrafted free agents, but there's probably not going to be more than the notes I put out that day, and then quickly talk about a couple of position battles if we don't already bring them up. So first off, should we talk about Ja'Wuan James' option? He was given his fifth-year option, which is $8 million in. It's only injury guaranteed. I guess it's not a surprise in terms of they can still cut him if it's performance based, and with James it's more likely that you're more worried about performance than injury. He's been pretty resilient, but there seems to be quite a lot of glowing reviews for average player at below average quality position in terms of the league average of play, and someone who would have been benched after a month last season if it wasn't for injuries across the offensive line. So maybe some short memories in terms of Ja'Wuan James's performance. So what's your thoughts on the option year for James?
Yeah, I think it was pretty much a foregone conclusion. The only reason why I think that they wouldn't have picked it up is if maybe they wanted to do an extension and they didn't want to establish that fifth-year option into
the
it.
$8 million tag price.
Yeah, because you're basically baking that into an extension if that's going to be the goal. But what kind of works in Miami's favor to the counterpoint and to kind of push them along into actually exercising it is the sudden rise in costs of right tackles. As of 2 years ago, right tackle cost was about 75% of a left tackle, if that, sometimes even half, depending on the quality of the tackle. And now suddenly they're pretty close to being in the ballpark. They're pretty similar. I think it's probably like 90% at like the top end. So that's not necessarily great for Miami in terms of an extension, because you saw some pretty similar players get a lot of money there in free agency with extensions and free agent deals. But I thought it was a good decision. I don't like, and I talked about this past offseason with some other guys, I don't like opening more holes than I have to until I really have a solid plan to get that replacement. And I think if his level of play doesn't pick up, I would probably prioritize a replacement pretty early next offseason as one of the top few needs. But hopefully he kind of reverts back to a little bit more earlier in his career, or like tail end
the
of
first 7 games he played.
Yeah, that's
that
what
was
I'm
his
saying.
best football.
Yeah. Then they moved him to left tackle, and he went back, and then it was just a lot more inconsistent and just generally a lot lower standard of play. So, hopefully whatever it is that's
And a
caused
lot of
him
that
to.
can just be team scouting and working out his weaknesses.
Yeah, and that's my worry too, is that teams actually just changed what they were doing with him, and it's not just his talent that's dipped; it's just teams figured him out.
And so his weakness, he's always been a limited player in terms of the run game, and he doesn't really have a strong suit in either scheme. But in terms of pass protection, it seems he always used to win with being able to sit inside somewhat and then recover using his length. But now teams are getting him, especially when he moved to left tackle that first period, he got beat a lot in the B gap inside. And I think there was some kind of issue setting too far on the outside and then kind of diving in on players that would rush in. And I think maybe that's kind of still in his mind. He overcompensates on the inside, and it's either that or he's just lost a bit of speed and he just can't recover as well going to the outside. Or maybe he's just like got a bit stiffer, but he doesn't seem to be able to have used that length as efficiently to stop pressure around the outside. But that could also just be teams setting him up on the inside to get him to be a bit more hesitant But that seems to be like his major flaw in pass protection anyway, or like the repetitive issue I've been seeing. But he's always been a limited player in terms of the run game. And kind of interesting, the one that like you cannot, I don't believe you can ever run more power than the Dolphins ran last year, which was 8% of their plays. With him as a right tackle, generally you need a pretty stout run tackle to stop where that pulling guard comes in to stop that getting seized up. And then I guess that transitions on us to talking about Isaac Asiata, who to me is a power only guard, left guard, who would be pulling. So they're kind of opposite directions in terms of where you're going as a team, unless they believe they can fix a myriad of issues, and his like athleticism for his size kind of makes up for that. So what was your thought of the Dolphins' first pick on the third day at 164th overall?
Yeah, I thought it was, in terms of value, I thought this was the right place for Asiata. I had him as a fifth, sixth round type of pick, developmental. Just looking directly at my scouting guide, as soon as they picked him, I was like, man, that seems a little strange. So I went back here and I looked and I compared him to Landon Turner, who is a traditional power guard from North Carolina, went to the Saints last year as a backup, didn't end up sticking for them. He's a right guard, so he kind of fit more of like that traditional right guard pass protector Turner did. And Asiata is kind of the opposite, where he's a little bit more of a run blocking. He's the same guy. He's a power, like you mentioned. But I thought that was really peculiar because he's a left guard, and so it's kind of an opposite of the archetype as far as interior line roles. And maybe that's something that they want to end up switching. But this
is some
is
right guard as well earlier in his career. So
yeah, so maybe
past, but
yeah,
and because unless you're turning into a left-handed run team, because his like biggest strength is him pulling, and most teams will be right-handed in terms of when the strong side of their run game being to the right, and so you're pulling your left guard in that regard. So yeah, like in terms of if you're playing him to a strength, one, it's in a power scheme, and it's always at left guard in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree. So I thought, the first thing I thought was, man, it's very strange because he's a big guy and he's a decent athlete for his size, but he does not really move well in terms of connecting at the second level. He's not an overly athletic guy as far as holding on to his blocks. Drops his head a lot when he has to move. So he's focusing, I think, too much on how he moves and his ability to stay balanced. He ends up on the ground a lot. So this is a guy that really everything I looked at, he's a lunge blocker as well. So like everything that has to do with moving, he does not do especially well. Now he's good as far as pulling and connecting right there at the line of scrimmage, but as he continues to move forward, he does not do well. So I don't know if Miami just thinks that they can kind of fix those technical issues that he has. Some of it's just an athleticism issue and how his build is. Maybe they just help him transform his body. He came in at 323 pounds, so maybe they want to thin him out a little bit.
To me, his issues are like even, especially in a zone scheme, it's like feet, hips, hands, and those first four steps, and like those are really like I can't think of any players that have refined those so quickly. And like he's not exactly a young player. He's the age he'll when the season starts, he'll be the same age as when Billy Turner got cut. So they didn't really have the patience with Billy Turner, who to me had one big flaw in his game, and that was A-gap pressure. And he wasn't able to fix that in over 2 years. So they couldn't fix one issue in pass protection with him, yet they think with a player at this same age, they're going to be able to fix his first four steps in the running play. They run half the time. He's good, I think, the first couple of steps in inside zone because that's just generally sealing down for him. But then when he's going up to the second level, he really hits his landmarks and he's on the floor a lot. I went back because there's a couple of people like Matt Miller, one of your colleagues, Ian, at Bleach Report, had in his, I don't know if it was his grade or his scouting profile of Asiata, said he is a main fit in a zone scheme running team. So I went to look to see if I was missing something in my notes, because to me, I see the entirely opposite player. So I won outside zone 4 times. Each time it was on the first drive of the game, and then they would never run it again. And Asiata had a negative in every single one of those plays. Or one, he just cut off the snap as a weak side blocker, and didn't even hit the D lineman he was played, because the D lineman just waited and just jumped over him. The second time, on the 4th step, he was just thrown to the floor because he didn't get his hands in the right place and his feet were lagging. Each time he also had different footwork. So generally your second step, you want it to be a 45-degree angle and set kind of back slightly. That varied. One time it was at almost like 90 degrees. It was really far back. And I think that was the time he got turned sideways on the second play of that game after he was on the floor. And that's the worst thing you can have when you get turned horizontal, because basically in outside zone, all you need to do is just keep flat, parallel with the line of scrimmage. That's the worst you can do. That's the least you should be able to do, is just stay parallel. And you don't need to move the guy to the sidelines. If you do, that's fine. But because of the way that play is constructed, any movement or no movement is going to create a line, like holes in the defense. As soon as you get turned sideways and you allow upfield penetration, unless it's the very backside, so you're a tackle, you can sometimes get away with it. But in the interior, you really can't. And so getting turned sideways is like a huge issue to me. And it seems to be built from the feet and just hand placement as well. You talked about him not being able to sustain leverage on players. That's also a real big issue with outside zone. I never saw him get far enough into more than 4 steps to see what that looked like in outside zone. But if it's anything like him pulling, it won't be good. And the issue there is generally the running back. We always talk about patience with zone runners, and that's because you're pressing the hole for at least 3 steps, 4 steps as a runner. And because you're going to the sidelines, it's generally a longer engagement in outside zone blocking. So that's going to be even more of an issue, having to block for longer or maintain hold of your defensive lineman for longer. If that's already an issue, that could be exaggerated in outside zone. So yeah, I don't like the pick. I don't even think he's a particularly good zone blocker. We know, I guess the one thing he fits is Gaisaik's big bodies, because he just says they're hard to get around inside. But he does get beaten by speed quite a bit. And so I think you need to be traditional in your pass protection and slide more to right guard. Slide more to the left guard and have your right guard on an island. And that's going to be somewhat of an issue if Bushrod is the de facto right guard at the moment, because last year they had to slide a lot to him in pass protection because he struggled. Is there any positives other than he's a good athlete for his size that you would say? Or people seem to like him. I don't know why, particularly in the scheme or the NFL anymore. There's not many teams that aren't running 50% zone.
Yeah, and especially Miami. Miami's 50% outside zone, and your best running back and a Pro Bowl running back thrives on outside zone. So it's just a really bizarre pick to me. I'd say as a positive is when he does get hands on guys, especially in pass protection, he's effective. He's really strong. You can tell that he's just a well-built dude inside of a phone booth. So when he doesn't have to move much, he can definitely create some movement and hold his own. But he was also on a line that had 4 guys drafted. Only their center wasn't draft eligible, I think. And so the rest of the line got drafted. And so in a sense that it's good for isolation. I was very easily able to, I feel get a good grasp on his strengths and weaknesses very quickly, especially next to a guy in Bowles. And maybe that's an advantage because he worked with a little bit more of a finesse type left tackle Maybe that's a good experience thing, but Bowles was pretty nasty though too. So I mean, I don't want to shortchange Bowles for anything or how he plays, but I'm not terribly upset about a 5th-round pick, especially when you look at the guards and centers that went
Yeah,
after
like
him.
there was no one better to pick. Like there wasn't like anyone.
Yeah, Kyle Fuller was the only guy that I liked.
Yeah.
But I mean, he was a 7th-round pick and a center, and centers are super easy to find in undrafted free agency and 7th round. So it's not like I don't think there was really anyone else unless if they were going to take a small school guy. Admittedly, I didn't watch like the Kutztown guard, and I didn't watch the Tennessee Martin guard, but chances are pretty slim that they're ever going to do anything. They did pass up some guys.
The issue to me isn't like what they spent on him. Like I don't
Right.
care.
It's just the
like,
identification of traits and
the issue is and like I don't think the player fits, and then it's the position the team has put itself in by having no consistent starting caliber guards on the roster. You're getting Larson after his best year, which was average play for a guard, and you're getting Bushrod after his worst year of his career.
Yeah, and if those are 2 older players too, so if they go down to injury, you're going to be stuck with a 5th-round rookie that's not a great scheme change or a scheme fit, and you've got Anthony Steen. Yeah, I mean, like that's pretty concerning. And if Pouncey goes down too, you're looking at Asiata, Steen, and Urbic. Yeah, like you said. So that's just a concern for me as well, especially to see Jari Evans get signed by the Packers right before the draft. I thought he was retiring, so that was a nice pickup for them. I'm just a little bit concerned, especially considering they had the chance to get better interior offensive linemen earlier, and that was my concern with the Raekwon McMillan pick. Like I'm happy to have McMillan, and I'm a positive outlook on him, but I just think that they may have passed it on some good interior line prospects that would have had a bigger impact. And now you're kind of stuck with guys who didn't fit in a really bad offensive line draft. Like there were probably 4 or 5 offensive guards worth drafting, period. And, and of course with the late 5th-round pick, like they had no chance at any of them. But like that's, just an inherent flaw of not having the picks. But yeah, I'm concerned about that.
The least amount of O-line drafted in 25
correct.
years or something.
Yep.
So then it doesn't bode well that in that, I guess a lot of the interior guys dropped further than we thought, like Lamp and Feeney. But that still doesn't bode well that he went in the 5th. So the league's obviously not that high on him either.
Yeah,
and that's probably because most teams just run zone now.
Yeah, and I think if you're going to do like the most comparable player, I'd say it's Danny Isadora from Miami. And I mean, he's a flawed player too. Like, I don't think he's much better, if at all better, than Asiata. But at least, like, if they would have taken Isadora, it would have kind of shown me, okay, schematically, we understand where they're at. Asiata would kind of hint towards a change at the position as far as the scheme. Like, you're changing the scheme, and that would kind of render Pounsley useless. It would render James useless for sure. So it's just you just want to see that consistency in that decision making. So
Ajayi maybe.
Yeah. So hopefully, I actually wouldn't mind hearing from them that they think they can transform his body a little bit, and kind of
we just won't see him in a couple of years on the roster.
Yeah. So
realistically,
and that's fair to expect from a 5th-round pick, by the way. Like that's not a problem. I just hope like the expectation for him is to not be like a 2018 starter, because that would be concerning to me, because I know that they want to go cheap at the position, but like you can't be that cheap at the position. Like you can't be awful at the position either.
And maybe this is like a time to like talk about like draft projections of players and like expectations, like because he was viewed as by some people as a 2nd round prospect, therefore like our expectations are higher than should be for a 5th round player. So people are going to be viewing him as, oh, he should be able to start because some people project him as a 2nd round pick. Well, the Dolphins didn't, otherwise they would take him in the 2nd round. The NFL viewed him as a 5th round player. So I guess that's kind of like something I think with all these picks, and we'll get to like Ford, I think got some of that as well. But there's some weird things with that program maybe. But I think that's like something you have to kind of put in check is like, don't have your expectations put in the right way. And maybe that's why we're like forced to be more negative on this, although I don't like, I had him as an undrafted grade for Miami because I just didn't see how he worked.
Yeah. For Miami specific, I also would have had him undraftable. Or
I
at
wouldn't
least
have had him on my board unless if he hadn't visited.
Yeah.
So
should
we move on?
the NFL, yeah, I'll say this too. Like the NFL gets stuff wrong, we get stuff wrong, everyone gets stuff wrong.
Oh yeah.
It's not. I got a lot. Like this is the worst weekend as far as the retort. Like, well, the coaches like him and the GM likes him, and so that's all that matters to me. It's like, okay, well these guys missed like top 5 picks. So like, come on, we're all human. We're all we're all making mistakes on this. They have more information to make the mistakes. So actually, their mistakes sometimes can be more atrocious than not. So it just all we have to go off of what we saw on the field.
More complex than what they put on tape as well. Like
yeah, exactly, and they have that access, and so maybe our expectation I think should be based on the round they go, even if we projected them better or worse. But the round should kind of give us an idea of what the team expects of him, and so a 5th round take is really just a flyer pick. I mean, if they cut him, it's like it's not really a big deal because, like you mentioned, I think day 2 you started to say, hey, look at some of these guys getting drafted. These guys are drafting undrafted free agents on their boards, and that was a really good point, I thought.
And even the trade up maybe indicated he's the last player that they had visit. Maybe those are indications like this was one of the last guys on their board with a draftable grade, and like that's not uncommon for getting into the 5th, 6th round that teams don't have anyone left on their boards. There's many teams that go into a draft with 100 gradable players or less. So that's also a possibility.
We saw a dude drafted from East Central Oklahoma State. Like you can better believe that dude did not have a draftable grade.
Should we move on to finally? So now this will be at least the uplifting part of the show. The Dolphins finally have a second free technique on the roster, and they even got a 3rd one back to back. So our 2-year glut of just having the most expensive free technique and then no backup is finally over. They started with Devon Godchaux, the LSU free technique, and then they also took it's 194 technique from Oklahoma State. Kind of interesting because they're almost the opposite player or the opposite kind of flaws. I think if you combine them, you'd have a really interesting player. It'll be interesting whether they see this as like a head-to-head competition for that 3rd defensive tackle role, and maybe we're moving more to the defensive line rotation that Miami had prior, where they had one nose tackle in Soliai, and now we have Phillips, and then Starks or Drake, but this time we'll have one of these, rookie and Sue. So maybe that's going to be the construction they go for, and try and make Phillips play as more of a base one technique. And just to me, like for him to really assert some value is you just want him to learn how to do that. And so maybe just force him to do that. And then in nickel, you're getting one of these guys on. But we'll start with Devon. What is your take on him as a prospect coming out?
Yeah, so I wasn't really a fan of him. I had him as another late 6th round pick. Last interior defensive tackle that I actually evaluated. I didn't go super deep, and I actually liked Tanzel Smart and Jerron Jones, who were also on the board a little bit more than Godchaux. But obviously as a 3-4 guy, it was a little bit difficult to project to a 4-3. But I did think that if he's going to be in a 4-3, it would be as a 3 techniques. That kind of fits.
I think that's his only position in the league. Like I don't think he's playing anything else.
Yeah, he's very inconsistent. I mean, everything that he does is pretty inconsistent. He had a good bowl game against Louisville, and he had a good game. Well, yeah, it's an inconsistent but still better than not game against Wisconsin. So I guess like maybe you're hoping he just turns it on in like certain games. I talked about how he kind of just roams and he guesses as far as where the play is going. He doesn't really have much play awareness. He's very late off the snap. I don't know if that's a scheme thing or if he's just like has
Because he
no.
gets out of his stance quickly, and is
Yeah,
like he gets out low as well, and he looks pretty explosive out of his snap. But yeah, he's like this. He's always like one of the last guys off the line.
it's really strange. It's just a matter of him. Like, I don't know if it's just understanding his role. Maybe he just didn't understand his role at LSU as far as like what he should be reading and like how he should be engaging. He just kind of seemed like a guy who was just kind of put out there and like never got coached, which I know isn't the case, but he just didn't seem to like know what to do as far as like utilizing his length, because he's got the length and he's got the hand
I
strength
think
and like
he's. I don't think he has length. I think he looks like really like short arm to me.
okay, I'll have to check. Because I saw it at times where he was able to kind of set the edge a little bit and kind of keep defenders or blockers out of his body,
I
but
think that's just because he gets out lower than most players of his
and that may
size.
be, yeah,
And I think he's got pretty good hands. He
yeah,
has like a nice little arm over move, like the clowny move. But
yeah.
yeah,
He's a
I'd like.
he's a strong dude. So yeah, like I'm gonna check here. He's got 32.5-inch arms. So yeah, it's pretty short arms. Um,
Okay.
19th percentile. So yeah, so that would make sense then. So yeah, he's gonna struggle. I actually liked Vincent Taylor a lot more. I thought that was a lot better of a guy that could actually make the roster. But I
I
mean,
think in
I
terms
like
of
the attempt though to add a three technique.
yeah, I think at least for Miami's sake, like as a free technique, he's just going to be one gapping. And I mean, he's got some size that maybe they think they can do the same thing in terms of mirroring, and then like whoever is next to is playing one technique. I think he's got enough bulk where maybe he can, and you're at least with one technique, you're still one gapping, and he can split a double team occasionally because of the like the way he gets out of his um, stance. And maybe being on a line full of snap jumpers in Miami, maybe it's good to have someone who's a bit more conservative. It might catch people off guard. But yeah, I think he's like an undersized free technique. So I just see him as like um, a nickel tackle. But then to move on to Vincent Taylor, then as you kind of prefer him.
Yeah, yeah. He wasn't a guy that I actually looked at before the draft, so I had to wait till after the
Okay.
draft. Very high cut player, so kind of awkwardly built, and that's going to limit his upside. Like you want to talk about why he fell this far. It's not because he's not explosive. It's not because he can't really get into the backfield and shoot gaps. I think he actually has some pretty decent athleticism for his size. It's just look at the way he's built. He's very top heavy, and it's kind of awkward to see him move. But like
Yeah,
he's actually pretty
he's way
strong.
stiffer. Like so,
Yeah,
Conchal looks kind of he can run around in space. Like in pursuit, he looks way better. Like that's where I think they
yeah,
separate as athletes,
yeah,
or at least
exactly.
positively for
Taylor's a
Godchild.
little bit, yeah, Taylor's a little bit more straight line. Like he can get upfield a little bit, and then like if he has to change directions at all, like he's just done for. You see him missing sacks, you see him missing tackles in the backfield because of it. Um, but
He's more powerful. I think he can two
yeah,
gap a little bit.
yep, yep, totally agree. And he looks the part too. Like he looks like he's a guy who's already kind of grown into his body, like fully developed. Whereas Godchow kind of looks, not to be disrespectful, but he looks kind of sloppy. Like his body type just looks sloppy, and some guys are like that. Some guys like don't
LSU
carry
guys
it well.
are kind of like that as well. Like if you think of
Oh yeah, their
the
reputation is terrible.
guard, Trey Turner.
Yeah,
Like he had a good like thick belt on him, but he could move. So I don't know if
yeah,
that's something they have there with the good food in Louisiana. But to me, like the big uh, like the issue with Taylor is he's just so upright. So that's why it's like if you could get Taylor to get as low as Godchild, there you get like a rosterable player. So it'll be interesting if they bring in any like free agent competition for this free technique position. But it's nice just that they're even considering having one on the roster as a nice change. So if you were to put your money on, you would have Taylor as the guy making the roster, or do
yeah.
you think they would? Is there any chance they have two, or do you think they're too similar a role, and we haven't seen that kind of investment in a roster spot before? And I guess these are easy guys to probably stash on a practice squad.
Yeah, I would think so, and they'll probably just pick their favorite and maybe potentially keep them on the roster. I'm interested to see what they do with Wormsley. See if he ends up
Yeah.
being a factor in any of this, because I actually still like Wormsley than I like better these two guys better. But yeah, I think one of them for sure will end up on
And
practice
maybe they
squad.
see with Walmsley, they did have him come into camp as an edge, and then through, I think it was after that second preseason game, then they started playing this free technique. So maybe with going into a full season, I have him on the depth chart as an edge again, just because that's where he started, and so
Yeah,
and because they picked these two free techniques, I figured they probably weren't too happy with Walmsley, and they did cut him after a month or so,
yeah.
and put him onto the practice squad. Uh, but yeah, if he is also in this competition, I'd probably put my money on Wormsley as well, and then probably trying to put both these guys on PS.
Yeah.
Any
So
other thoughts on Taylor?
not really. I was just, I was cool with these picks. Like, I wasn't huge on like the talent, but like you said, though, the only guy that went after them that I was kind of like, oh man, like that may have been an opportunity was Tanzel Smart. I think Tanzel Smart's a little bit more explosive than either of these two guys. I think as far as his build is a little bit more conducive to having success in the NFL. But I mean, it's a small complaint. It's not something that I would be like, oh, just an awful pick or anything like that. But that personally would have been my choice. But I understand and I like the direction there and kind of, I have to consider like process. I like the process that they kind of settled on these two guys.
I think there was a couple of safeties I liked that they had visit, but I think they both still haven't even found rosters, and Devin Chappelle and David Jones. And maybe David Jones got drafted later.
Yeah, and if we're looking at other positions, I definitely would have liked a couple other guys. Dylan Cole, been talking about him. Chase Roulier is an interior center. He would have been nice. Bucky Hodges, which there's some stuff going on there to make him go that late. He's definitely not a 6-round talent on the field. And then also, I think there was one more guy.
William Likely would kind of be interesting, but I
I
don't think
wonder if he.
he got
Yeah,
picked
I
up.
wonder if. Well, yeah, I was gonna say I don't know if he got picked up. Jalen Myrick is a slot corner. I'm surprised he went in the 7th round. That would have been
Yeah,
nice.
yeah, I liked him.
And Elijah Lee. That's who it was. Elijah Lee,
Okay,
the weak
yeah,
side linebacker from Kansas State. Dude, the Vikings literally had my
pretty good
draft
drafted.
guide right there as they were making these picks. And Rick Spielman and I are always like super close as far as like what we like in players and like how we want to build rosters. So he's just like my spirit animal. So they obviously had a great draft because he likes my guys.
I will move on to the final pick, which was at 237, Isaiah Ford from Virginia Tech. So this is another player that was projected higher by some people. To me, he reminds me of like the poorest version. He's reminds me of like the same body type as Devontae Parker and Lippett, but more of a Lippett game as a wide receiver, not as a corner. But that kind of like thin, long player, like still need like not the hugest route variety, but maybe and not great with the ball in his hands in the same way as Devontae Parker is. That's probably his biggest weakness for me, and a limited route tree, but kind of routes that Miami don't have a huge amount of diversity with as a player in which you're happy with across the middle and vertically. So many ran crosses, posts, and verts. So there's some synergy there with Stills, but Stills is more of from verts to outside breaking routes. So then to have Ford, who's like verts inside breaking routes, that gives like a bit of a change up. I think he has some like nice variation. I don't think he's got a great release, which is maybe the same. Like the biggest issue with Devontae Parker coming out was he has one amazing release and then no other releases. And with Ford, he has one okay release and no other releases, and he can struggle with physical. What are your thoughts on the Ford pick?
Yeah, I for the most part agree with your assessment. The only thing I say I liked his releases a little bit better.
Okay.
But overall, though, you're right. Though he is a very physically limited player with his frame. He's so thin. Now, that being said, I had him as a fourth round type of value, mid round. And so for Miami, that would have been a little bit lower because I don't really think that he brings much different to the table. I say like a KD Cannon or especially Noah Brown, who went 2 picks later than him. I think Brown physically, but he has weight concerns like the other way. So Noah Brown he struggles with his weight on the upper end, whereas Ford can't, at least to this point, hasn't really bulked up. He's had to add a lot of weight in the last 2 years. I think they said on the broadcast he's added 15 pounds since the end of his sophomore season. So he was tiny when he was producing at Virginia Tech, and that's going to be a struggle in the NFL. But I like him in terms of the talent. I don't think like a high upside type of player. I think he kind of is what he is. But that being said,
in the air as well. I think that's one thing I'm probably going to say.
He's very competitive in the air. He's not like super long. Like I think he was listed at like 6'3", and he came in a lot smaller than that. And it's just the strength. If he can add strength, and this is probably a guy where you're saying, okay, if you can put him on like the practice squad for a year or two, or have him as like the fifth receiver, and you just can like feed him protein, just give him protein shakes and steak, and just hopefully add some muscle to his frame. Maybe you've got something pretty decent here. I love the value in the 7th round. I mean, why not? I'm definitely not at that point in the draft that anyone I really had better, besides like injury guys or character guys. So I'm just surprised he fell so far.
Especially going into undrafted free agent, like you're so close to UDFA time there, you almost want a huge position of need, although Miami had 6 wide receivers on the roster at the time of picking him, because you want to have a way of luring free agents. We saw that be successful with still Hewitt and Hull on the roster from that undrafted free agent linebacker class that they did so well to recruit a couple of years back. So I kind of understand the pick there in terms of we can try and persuade some guys at other positions to come here. Maybe easier than we would be able to with a player like Ford, who realistically doesn't have much shot at playing time, given Miami generally just use 3 wide receivers and do not rotate much. There's some kind of like talk about Ford like maybe pushing Carew or Scott for a roster spot. I guess what's interesting about this, and this may be a camp battle, is like Carew has already at the end of the season lost out to Scott. And I think Ford is a better player than Scott. So then by that kind of measure, you could maybe understand that logic of maybe Scott Ford being able to make the roster. I think they've invested so much in Carew, and it's that they would. I think it's a bit too much to say that he'll be gone, but maybe Grant, if we see his special teams play not improve, that could be a guy that maybe gets usurped, because I don't really see him having a role at all offensively. So therefore, he kind of has to be a plus on special teams, which I think is a bit too far to say he's been so far. So what do you think is like his prospects of making the roster, and how that the back end, because we kind of know the first 3 guys, we're going to have those guys for the next 3 years. I don't think there's much debate in that.
Yeah, I think the first 3 guys, I think Carew is pretty safe, probably through his rookie contract, for better or for worse. I think Ford's a similar prospect and player to Carew.
Really, you want teams, if they're spending the amount they did on Carew, to have some conviction in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, and hopefully it's for good reason. Like, it would be horrible if they cut him. Like, just for many reasons, not just for the fact that they trade that much. It would just be an organizational failure with him. It wouldn't even just be a matter of trading up for him and then cutting him. Like, it's fine to admit mistakes, but like you said, you got to have a plan for him then. And so hopefully he's good enough to beat out Ford. I think he's a similar prospect, and in the case of a coin flip, Carew's going to stay, which is fair. Grant, I have trouble. I don't think he's going to make this roster personally. They picked up Drew Morgan, Malcolm Lewis, and those guys aren't going to really push him. Like DeMaurice Stringfellow and Isaiah Ford are more talented, at least as far as what we saw them do at bigger schools. But as far as
How
like
do you feel
fitting,
about Ford in the slot as just kind of like a crosser vertical slot player? And is
well,
that kind of the way you push Grant out? Because we don't really have a player that can do that. Maybe, I guess, like Parker is maybe the best player outside Landry to fill in as some slot duties.
yeah, and that's an interesting question because for me, Grant's biggest value, like you said, is on returns, but you already have a bigger investment in a similar return player in Kenyon Drake.
Yeah.
And Damian Williams can fill in at return.
And Landry can do it in a pin.
Landry can do it. Pitts can do it. Like, I don't think that we need to worry about returns. And I know Grant has that speed, but he looked so out of place at receiver last year. Unless if he massively improved, I don't know how on earth you would justify a much better receiver. Now he doesn't have the special teams value, and maybe that's your justification. But just from an offensive standpoint, both Ford and Stringfellow are better players. Like that's, and I
Ford
think they're both
can do some coverage stuff as well. Like, say he's just different specialty. He's like the special teams value, like that no one cares about. Like people only care about,
the
or I mean,
returns. Yeah,
say care about the people that snap and kick. They don't
yeah,
really care about them either, but they complain about them when stuff goes wrong. But
yeah,
no one complains about the vice guy or the gunner.
yeah.
So
So that's yeah, that's probably going to be the most interesting battle I think at receiver is just what they want to do with those fifth and sixth slots because Scott, Grant, Ford, Stringfellow, I think that should be a real battle. If you're going by talent, I think Ford and Stringfellow are more talented, but they're also kind of like similar players. So you're not going to want both of them, I don't think. And Scott is a different athlete than those guys as well. So just I think in terms of like how he moves is a little bit different. So it just depends on what they expect out of the position. I just personally, I'm not keeping a guy who only contributes on special teams because that should be what Kenyon Drake really helps you out on, like to maximize his value.
should we move on to the wide receivers that were picked up in undrafted free agency? I know you don't have too much to say on these players.
Yeah, I don't know them at all except for Stringfellow.
I guess we can start with Stringfellow. So I guess he's like almost similar ways, like catch radius and body control. Like those are the traits I put really high on Miami's like desire list for wide receiver, and we kind of see them again. I think that's the only part of his game that's really kind of interesting is when he's in the air and tracking the ball. On the floor, he's like pretty ploddy and not really doing much at the top of routes. So I don't being much of a threat for making the roster. What was your thoughts on him as he's one guy you've seen?
Yeah, I didn't think he's a great fit for Miami's roster, but I don't mind the risk on a different type of player for the team. He's a pretty limited guy. He can make some really crazy catches. Like his circus catches are really fun, and he's going to probably be fun to watch with Matt Moore on second team in preseason. Like
you make up for that stuff.
yeah, like I think we're going to be able to get some entertainment out of that. And
not with fails though. Fails.
Oh yeah, I'm totally here for the fails
Too,
revival.
yeah, fails forever.
Yeah, exactly. So, man, I totally forgot they picked him up.
I'm
That's
gonna
awesome.
get shit for putting fails over Doxy. I almost put him over Matt Moore, but I realized like that's probably
Yeah, it's not gonna happen. Yeah.
can dream.
Um, but yeah, Stringfellow's fun. I don't think he's a guy that's gonna cut in the NFL. At least not here. Maybe in like a vertical passing offense that only asks him to run nines, but outside of that, he really doesn't bring too much.
And then they actually brought in quite a lot of wide receivers in with UD and it's Francis Owusu, who's at Stanford. He didn't play much. He didn't get targeted much in Stanford scheme. He's big and fast. I mean, like I haven't really. There's not really much you can take from him. He was a 5-year player, and I don't think he ever had more than like 30 targets. So really limited production, but like those are the kind of guys you want to take bets on. And as well as like thinking about these players, it's also guys that are going to be on scout teams, guys that are going to replicate schemes or teams you're going to go against as well. So that's kind of something to have in mind as well when talking about these players. Next guy is Malcolm Lewis, who's Miami. I think he was a 5-year Miami player. Didn't play much. I think he always had like lower body injuries. He looks stiff to me and a bit slow, but maybe I was just seeing him after he was hurt or playing hurt. I think he's pretty much limited to the slot, but pretty good hands. I'd say he's like his desirable trait. And then the last wide receiver is a slot-only guy in Drew Morgan. You're not going to really want to throw it to him. He's not like in the way I was talking about Ford as potential slot player. Like he has no threat vertical to him, and not a very big catch radius, but good hands. I think like you're not throwing any deeper than 10 yards to him, but he could be in terms of like getting scheme reps. He could imitate some of the things that they do with Jarvis Landry in those first 10 yards from the line of scrimmage. So I could kind of imagine, if you want to imagine someone, it would be kind of like his ilk. We'll stick with offense. We'll just go through them, then we'll move on to defensive side. Eric Smith, who's I think he's a right tackle, perfect fit in the zone blocking scheme. I think they just ran a slide protection at Virginia, so it's a bit hard to project him in pass pro because that's like the only different pass protection you ever see. But he looks pretty athletic, and doing zone stuff, he looks good, and pretty good athlete. So he might be a practice squad guy that you roster for a couple of years and see if you can get him as a backup right tackle. I think he at least has like interesting traits, and I liked his hands. So the fact he's like moves well, his feet are good, and he gets pretty good leverage in outside zone. It's just a massive question mark how he does in pass protection. They also got Colin Buchanan, who's a pretty versatile. Like I think he can just about live with zone and just about live with power. So that is kind of useful in terms of what Gase may want to do. Like he does try and play some power. I think he could play right tackle, but I'd rather slide him inside. His feet, he's got a pretty good anchor. He like sets back pretty well, and he can even, if he gets blown up, he will like re-anchor well. Hands are probably like his biggest flaw, but I think he's like an interesting guard. If any of, like, I could see a more clear route for him getting playing time than Asiata, just in terms of what he needs to fix to be like serviceable, in my opinion. And then the last offensive player was Devon Smith, who's running back, pretty big body, but I really like his vision. His scheme, they only had 2 reads, which is like most colleges in zone. But he pressed pretty well. He would get to his second read quite often. And then if the second read's not there, he's just bouncing. When he bounces, he's not really going to do anything. He's not great in open field at all, but outside zone, within the tackles, inside zone, he's pretty good at least getting through the line of scrimmage. And he can get through arm tackles, but you're not really expecting much more for him. So kind of like think the first year of Damian Williams, almost that kind of type player. Do you think there's any chance of them adding an extra running back to this roster, or like competition for Drake? I know they've got Storm Johnson as well, who I liked quite a bit coming out, because obviously he had like a rough start to his career.
Yeah, I liked him too. How do you
see that kind of roster?
No, I liked him too. I was actually a little bit surprised that they weren't a little bit more aggressive and in either getting a running back when one of those late picks or an undrafted free agency. I mean, Devion Smith is a terrible. He's awful. I saw a lot of him at Michigan. He's definitely like a training camp body. Actually, just kind of looking through like the entire offensive roster and even defensive roster, like there's not many guys here, bodies that are at all, I think, rosterable. Like if a guy goes down, I think they're going to have to swoop pretty quickly on anybody else that's available.
I found it really easy to do a 53 projection. It
yeah,
like Nicholas, Ford. Like the fact Ford is like one of the names I kept off the list and found hard to.
Yeah, like that to me says like that they really lack depth, and we knew that, but I mean, I just think, I don't know, I expected more when I was actually looking at some of these names. Like, this is a pretty cut and dry. I don't think any of these are really difficult decisions.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would like to
I
see
found
another
it
back.
harder to get up to 53. Like, to be honest, like I had the same thing last year, and I thought they'd be a 500 team, and they were a bit better than that. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, sometimes, a couple lucky breaks go your way and a couple things go your way. But, I'm a little bit worried about the regression because of that. And especially with injuries and stuff, a couple extra injuries, and that can go pretty south pretty quickly. So, no, I mean, I think offensively, like, I wouldn't mind them adding another young running back. There's a ton of young running backs out there. But yeah,
well, they might need a veteran. Like they've got Damian Williams as the veteran of that group.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's a good point. We saw Jamal Charles meeting with, and I'm not saying that sort of back. Doesn't
Then,
even be that veteran. Doesn't mean
but
it
just
doesn't
someone
mean
who's
he's
played
veteran.
and like
Yeah,
seen
but
stuff.
we're starting to see some of the veterans take some of these visits, though. Meeting with Denver, LeGarrette Blunt, guy who's still out there, and so it doesn't even have to be a bigger name. It could just be a guy, even a guy. If it's like watch New Orleans, they may cut some of their vets. Guy like maybe like Travis Cadet or someone like that would just be a helpful body to be in this, because I mean, like I said, if Damian Williams misses a month, I don't really know. I mean, I like Storm, but he hasn't showed me anything at the
And
NFL
not
level.
just on the field as well, in
Yeah.
in the film room, being able
Yep.
to like show tendencies, show where players are making mistakes, where they can improve.
Yeah.
That's a huge aspect because all those players are still learning the game. So to have someone that's seen everything is valuable. Um, I'll quickly go through all these defensive players, and then we can maybe quickly talk about where we see areas where free agents may be able to slot in. I think there's one spot in particular that it maybe needs an extra body. But I'll quickly go through this list. So corner for Torrey McTire had a really good game, big game against Wyoming. We had 2 picks right at the end of the game. I think he can play slot as well as outside. He didn't play a huge amount though, but he looks like flexible, pretty good ball skills. But yeah, really thin. I think he's like a way away. I think you watched the Houston guy Cameron Malvu, who is really weird. Like he looked like the way he tested, you would think he'd be like a productive pass rusher. I watched over 20 games of him, never saw him have a sack. And I think he had 3 in over 50 games in his career. He does get get tips at the line of scrimmage. I think he has probably more tips than sacks. So maybe that's a scheme thing. I have to go back and watch Houston. I didn't have any of my notes that they mush rush or just play the flats. But maybe that's one thing. But he's kind of similar to, at least has the tipping that's similar to like Fade, and similar looking kind of athlete. Fade's a bit more dynamic, but similar kind of like upper body build. Do you have any thoughts of him? I know you watch Houston a bit.
Yeah, not many. I mean, he's just an upside guy. I mean,
You're just
he's a
hoping
good
that
athlete.
numbers, he like plays to the numbers at some point.
Yeah, maybe unlock something in him, and you practice squat him for a year or two, and maybe something good happens. But I mean, I just through all these guys that they picked up, I didn't see anybody that maybe Chase Allen. Do you want to talk about Chase Allen a little bit?
Oh yeah, can do.
Yeah, because athletically, I think he's pretty intriguing. Just kind of looking at his pro day numbers, he had really good numbers for a 6'3" dude at linebacker. I can bring those up while you talk about him.
His film is bad.
Oh, really?
He just looks like a big-bodied Mike to me. Like I watched a couple of their games, and I have like no notes on him. Like I take a lot of notes on players just so like I've got them. So if I have to go back, and I don't have to go back and watch games because I've got notes on everyone. And yeah, like to me, the first game I saw of him was like, he looks like a kind of clunky Mike, and no outstanding plays or. I think I have watched like 5 or 6 of their games over the last couple of years. So Maybe they're the wrong games. I don't know, but yeah, I don't think he's much to look at all.
Okay, yeah, because athletically, he this will probably be pretty surprising to you. So he's 6'3", 241 pounds, ran a 4.6 40, 4.6 flat, 10-yard dash of 1.65, 33-inch vertical jump, which that's kind of mediocre. 20-yard shuttle, 4.19, and here's the kicker: three-coned, 6.88.
Oh, geez.
That's almost Christian McCaffrey. Like Christian McCaffrey was at 6.77.
But this
So
is kind of like the Dolphins' class in a nutshell. It's like the players that are really good athletes, they don't really show it on film, and then the
yeah,
players that are didn't test well have like really dynamic athletic traits on the field. It's really weird. I mean, like there's like Harris's explosive numbers are like pretty good in terms of like jumps if you use his pro day stuff, but I don't use pro day.
yeah.
So yeah, but that's kind of funny that it's like there's some continuity of like them not trusting. They seem to be more on the worth than athletic traits. In terms of like they didn't pick they picked productive big school guys, and not guys that tested really well. I think they only had 2 players that tested over the 50 percentile for their position, and that was Asiata, who just barely got over, and the what's the linebacker? I've already forgotten because I don't like him. McMillan.
Oh, McMillan, yeah.
So the
Interestingly enough,
only guys.
yeah,
Go ahead.
interestingly, looking at so mathbomb on Twitter, Kent Lee Plate. I'm not sure how he says his last name, but he's a cool guy. I definitely recommend following him. He
Yeah,
does some
really
really
good.
cool math stuff. He does a relative athletic score, which there's not a huge like, and he'll admit this, like there's not a huge success as far as like projecting this. But it's just really interesting to kind of compare. So he did the Dolphins class. He did all the draft classes, but he broke it down into the Dolphins specific picks. So Charles Harris, athletic score of 2.72 out of 10, which is below average, which we expected from his combine. Since 1999 at the defensive end position, ranked 477th out of 654. In 2017, 51 out of 86. Raekwon McMillan.
Interestingly, Harris, like Spark numbers are really different to his numbers. So like Spark, Harris is like top 20, I want to say.
Wow. Okay.
I think Spark might use high school numbers. I'm not sure.
Okay.
They may input combine numbers.
Okay. But basically, I mean, as I go down these, McMillan is the only one that's above average. Basically, Tankersley, Asiata, and Taylor were about average for their positions. Godchow was god awful, and Isaiah Ford was below average. So, just kind of going to your point again,
Yeah.
that was very much what the Dolphins class was, and so
The one thing
they went
with
after football
that
players.
school is that's looking at like a rounded athlete. So you kind of have
Yes.
to be good at everything. So with those players, they have certain tests they did really well, and then some that they did badly.
Yeah, and it's not a perfect measure.
Yeah.
It's not, but it's just kind of interesting looking at like their overall testing measurements. Because I mean, I would agree though, like from the same breath, like even if you're really high on these players, the one thing that you cannot say is that they're great athletes. Like even on the film,
Yeah.
Charles Harris has really great things about him, but overall you see some of the limitations. It's not like this was a Myles Garrett, type of player where it's just there's
Yeah.
no limitations.
Yeah, and like Tankersley, he's fast, but he's not like an athlete. He's like fast in
Yeah.
a straight line.
Yep, he's got, and we talked about the spider charts last episode. You don't need to have a full spider chart to be great.
Yeah.
You have a trait or two, and then hopefully your strengths your strengths as far as your play style accentuate that to like the maximum degree.
Exactly.
And I think Charles Harris does that, by the way, that's why I think he's going to be a successful pro. But yeah, just kind of an interesting measure. I mean, just it's fun to look back at that type of stuff, especially as we're tracking that over multiple years.
Maybe before the camp starts, we should go through all the different metrics and how they rank for their position. at each one and see whether that kind of shows us anything. So I've got all that data anyway. So may as well look. But yeah, like Harris is much higher up on. Actually, a lot of these players are much higher up on Spark scores than they are others. Although I think Asiata is much lower on Spark. So it's just interesting, like how kind of different metrics show different put players in different places because they're looking at different parts of the body or weighting things differently. But I'll just finish these players. Maurice Smith, who's a transfer from Bama to UGA, played some nickel corner. He didn't play much, but he's like pretty versatile in terms of like I think he can play as a box safety, like a big dime back, and play some nickel corner. Pretty good ball skills. Like Alabama were pretty pissed off that he transferred and just played 1 year at Georgia. So, I mean, Saban's even just pissed off that he left or likes him. And then I think the last guy we haven't talked about is Praise Martin Oyut, I'm going to say. Really raw, inconsistent, but he makes a lot of plays on the ball. He's definitely an edge rusher and pretty productive as well. Like he has like a couple of sacks that were like created sacks and uses his length well and can set the edge some. But I think that's everyone. Larry Hope as well as Acorn. I had no notes on him. And we got a punter. He's a punter. I'm not going to pretend I know what. I don't watch punters.
Yeah, that's for Chuck Zada from Inside the Pylon. That's who I just referred to, and he knows I don't know.
I watch the guys covering punts. I don't watch punters.
Yeah, you're insane.
He can probably kick a ball.
That insane. Yeah.
I don't think he's Australian, so that probably means he's a bad punter. I don't know.
That's definitely a knock.
I know if they go to LSU, they're a good punter. That's all I know.
Okay.
I think though. Or
that's more than I know. Yeah, it's more than I know at the position.
I don't even know that. I just said that. Is that so? The one thing I wanted to touch on quickly is there's no one technique after Jordan Phillips, and Jordan Phillips is not your prototype one technique in terms of what he does on the field. Are we just going to do the opposite now? Now we've got some more free techniques. We're not going to have any more one techniques. We're just
you know what? At least that would be playing to strengths. So
yeah,
it's a shame that Dalvin Tomlinson went so high. It's a shame that Miami didn't have that 4th round pick to go get Jaleel Johnson because those two guys would have been really nice in that type of role. But that's hey, I give Miami credit for this. They didn't sacrifice future assets this year. And I don't know if maybe it was just part of their process where they looked back on last year. And
they know they're going to have comp picks. And so they had that cushion last year where they felt like, oh, we got these free picks, so let's just spend.
Yeah. So it could be a mixture of both. I'm hoping it's a mixture of both. I'm
hoping they've learned their lesson. It's like, oh shit.
I do too. I think in general, from this draft, that was sort of like my takeaway is that like this process just seemed cleaner than it did last year. Last year seemed very random to me. As far as even like the guys that they were adding, they were just very situational type players. Whereas this year, it felt more like, okay, these are guys with traditional roles and responsibilities. They had those same roles in college, at least in the first 2 days. Day 3 is always going to be a little bit of an adventure, and I'm fine with that. It's great if they can make one of these players work out. But yeah, I like that they didn't leverage future picks because, to be honest, there was talent that they could have. And if they would have come away with it, I wouldn't have been critical of it as long as they didn't overpay. We saw some overpaying, like the Saints moving a 2nd round pick next year for Alvin Kamara, which is insane. It's going to be the 3rd running back on their roster if they keep Ingram. And next year's a deeper running back draft. So that's just insane. But Miami didn't fall into that trap this year like they did last year. And so hopefully that's just an improvement of their process. And you would expect that out of a younger front office as they, at least younger in terms of working together.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Tannenbaum and Greer, they've been around long enough that they should know. They should, if you're going to spend so much to trade up on a player, maybe have a plan for them.
They should, but maybe they learn the hard way though, and maybe that's a long-term thing that works out better.
Would you bring back Paul Soliai before you go?
Yeah, I'm serious. I'm looking at this depth chart that you've got right here. the only guy I see that could maybe make an argument is Wormsley. And that's offense and defense is Wormsley and Ford. The rest of the depth on this
it's in like
making the 53.
I
Yeah,
also think
sorry.
he's playing
Making the
nose tackle.
53 of
Yeah.
guys that aren't making the 53.
And I can make
That's
some arguments for taking players off that list, like Pitts and
easily.
Lucas. And
Easily. There's guys here that I would not want on my 53. Lucas, Pitts, Godchow,
Burbrick,
Urbrick, I mean,
Nate Allen,
Steen's
Andre
fine.
Branch,
Duarte, Rashawn Scott, Jakeem Grant. Like, to be honest, I don't think those are guys that should be on a playoff caliber team. And it's going to be a process. They inherited a mess as far as the depth, but they've got to get a little bit better competition in here. They've got to do a good job of scouting the wire. Maybe they will when cuts start happening. Maybe that's where they'll add some of that talent. But yeah, I'm all in favor of them actually going out and adding a couple cheap veterans, whether it be at defensive back or especially defensive line. They just don't have in much depth. You need some guys to just soak up some snaps too in the preseason.
And they're pretty dependent on Michael Thomas's versatility, making up for some spots on the depth chart, like nickel, safety. Like
yeah, if he goes down, if he goes down, then it's going to be Jordan Lucas doing that same role, I think, and that's pretty scary.
Yeah, or Pitts maybe, or Akins. Yeah, it's just rough.
It's super thin. This is a razor thin roster. And entering, and I know this is super far to project, but like looking at the 2018 offseason, and I'm not even looking at free agents outside Juwan James. It's like you're entering next offseason with at least probably 3, 4, 5, 6 major needs, maybe 7 major needs.
So it's safety, both guards,
both guards. Yep, both guards. Tight end. Yep, tight end. Defensive tackle again. Safety and corner. I mean, it's not a great job.
Maxwell's going.
Yeah, even if he's back though.
Yeah.
Even if he's unless if Maxwell gets hurt this year and we see a lot of Tankersley and Howard, and even then you still could say, well, maybe slot corner depending on what happens with Bobby. So like, it's just razor thin, man, and that's scary. Like, maybe it works out well and they get lucky and some of these second, third year players, first year players just outperform expectations. But that's my big concern, is projecting long term and saying, is this roster where it needs to be long term? And no, it's not. I mean, when you're 2 drafts in, you should really start building that depth. And I think this was a good draft. I'm just concerned that free agency, they didn't do enough. Instead of getting 1-year deals, start adding guys that are a little bit younger on multi-year deals that are ascending, as opposed to just trying to patch holes with like Nate Allen.
Or maybe next time we record, we'll do one on the remaining free agents that are out there, how we can fill some of those gaps, and then look at
those. And those guys, and that'll probably
there's
happen.
some good players.
Yeah, you're going to start seeing that last wave of second to last wave of free
agency. Because guys like Jared Aldrick, like they're waiting to see where the best opportunity is.
Yeah, and those guys
get some money. They've got around 18 mil.
Yeah, and they've got that, and also veterans want to wait too, so that they can try to skip training camp. So it's not just teams that are waiting; the players are literally waiting. Like this thing with Jay Cutler, he's just waiting because he doesn't want to go to training camp. It's not abnormal, and I don't blame these guys that have been in the league for 10 years. They don't need training camp.
So last year we picked up Foster and Rambo. Was there anyone else? Culliver, although he never played.
Yeah, Culliver.
They were all after the draft.
So yeah, there's a bunch of vets, exactly. I mean, and they're cheap. They're dirt cheap at that point.
So that's what we'll do next time we join you. But thanks for listening, and thanks for everyone that's joined us this last week for all the draft coverage. Make sure you follow Ian at NFL Film Study and the web podcast at Miami Pod. You can go on the website, themiamipod.com. It's where you can listen to this. iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean. If you haven't left us a review and would like to do so, that would be very kind of you. And I think that's everything. Goodbye.